Okay, you know what I'm going to say. Pause the video, 10 questions, have a go, and in 5 seconds, the answers will appear, as if by magic. Okay, there you go. There are the answers to the questions. Mark your answers. If you've got any questions, if you need any help, just get in touch with your teacher or have a look back over the topics that you're struggling with. Right, so we're going to do 7 key areas, 7 and 8 together. We've been learning about the immune system, and we've learned how the immune system helps to defend your body and to fight off pathogens or organisms that can cause disease. So we're going to learn how we use that knowledge of the immune system to help us fight disease. So the topic, the first one we're going to look at is immunization. Pause the video, have a look through these key learning points, and then at the end of the video, use the key learning points to generate your questions. Okay, so we're going to have a look at immunization, and we're going to break it down into 3 main areas. Vaccinations, which you might have heard about, herd immunity, again, which you might have heard about recently, and antigenic variation, which again has been in the news recently. So how does a vaccination work? How does a vaccination lead to immunity? Well, remember, we talked about the fact that the antigen, or the protein marker that's on the outside of the pathogen, it's the antigen that stimulates the immune response. So the lymphocytes come across the antigen, they recognize it as foreign, they replicate, and they fight it off. But as they replicate, they also produce memory cells. Did you forget that? Memory cells. So memory cells mean, if you've got memory cells in your body, it means the next time that pathogen comes into your body with the same antigenic marker, that you get this secondary response, which is greater, which is faster, which is stronger. And so quite often you don't get the disease, as it were, even though the pathogen is in your body. So a vaccine is done or carried out by getting the antigen into your body to trigger the initial immune response, the primary response, so that if ever the pathogen does come into your body, then you've got an army of memory cells lying in wait specifically for that antigen, and your secondary response kicks in. So how do we do that? How do we, what's involved in the vaccine? What's inside a vaccine? Well, the antigen is the key, because it's the antigen that triggers the immune response. And there's various ways of getting the antigen into the body. So the ones in blue are the ones really that you need to focus on. So dead pathogens. So the pathogen itself is either dead, damaged, or it's part of the pathogen. And the reason for that is that if you put part of the pathogen in, or the dead pathogen in, or a damaged pathogen in, it still has the antigen. It still has the antigenic marker to trigger the immune response on it, but it's not able to replicate. And so it's not going to cause an infection. It's not going to cause the disease, as it were. The one in red is not needed for the course, so you're not going to get asked about that, but you may have heard about mRNA or RNA vaccines, because one of the vaccines that's being used for coronavirus is an RNA vaccine. Try and just work out in your head how that works. So remember, I said that the immune response is triggered by the protein antigen marker. So how does mRNA link into that? I'm not going to explain it. I'll show you the next slide, and you can pause and have a read through it. But this next bit is not in the course. Okay, so this isn't in the course, but feel free to read through it. So we've said that the key to a vaccine is the marker, the antigen, because that's what triggers the response. But there's other things that go into a vaccine as well. I mean, the majority of a vaccine will be water, but adjuvants are also added to vaccines. Now, you don't need to know examples. I've given you 2 examples here of adjuvants that are added to vaccines. All you need to know is the definition of an adjuvant. So an adjuvant is a chemical substance that is added to a vaccine, and it basically makes the response, the immune response, either stronger or it makes the immune response last longer. So it enhances the immune response to the vaccine. So that's it for vaccinations. Let's have a look at herd immunity. So herd immunity happens when you get a large percentage of the population immunized. And it's a key way of stopping the spread of disease through a population. All right, so these next few diagrams help us to explain herd immunity and how disease spreads through a population. So on the left, you've got a population of people, and you've got 2 individuals that have the disease, and they are contagious. And then you've got the rest of the population that are healthy, but they're not immunized. Now, these individuals, these 2 individuals that are sick, they do not come into contact with everybody in the population. But these circles show the people that they do come into contact with. So it might be family members, people they work with, friends. These are the people that they associate with regularly. And generally, there'll be an overlap. So some of this person's family will overlap with some of this person's family and friends. So if this is the case within the population, you can see the result. Very, very quickly, that disease will spread to pretty much everybody within the population. A huge proportion of the population will end up with the disease because it just spreads from one person to the next very, very easily. And the spread is quick. If we take a look at the next situation, so we've still got the 2 individuals, the same people that they're coming into contact with. But now we've got a few individuals that have been immunized, possibly through vaccination. So just a small percentage of the population are vaccinated. You can see the end result. You still end up with a huge proportion of the population getting the disease. The individuals that have been vaccinated are fine. I'm all right. But the disease still spreads from person to person, from group to group. And so the population as a whole, gets the disease. A large proportion of the population gets the disease. So, however, this is when we're coming to the point where we get herd immunity. So if you can get enough of the population vaccinated, if you can get a proportion of the population immunized to the disease, you can control the spread of the disease. And you can stop the spread because the links between the groups, there is no way for the disease to pass between one group and the next group. So to explain what I mean, this individual here has the disease, and you can see this individual here that hasn't been immunized ends up getting the disease because they come into contact with them. But then that stops the spread there because you can see here that this individual, if he got the disease, he doesn't actually come into contact with anybody else that is susceptible to the disease. Everybody else in his circle, as it were, has been immunized. And so by getting to a certain percentage of people in the population immunized or vaccinated, you can limit the spread of this disease throughout the population. That percentage is called the herd immunity threshold. So the percentage of the population that you need to reach for that disease in order to stop the spread throughout the population is the herd immunity threshold. And that changes. It depends on three key things. So it depends on the disease. So you can see some examples down at the bottom there of diseases and how they are transmitted and how they are spread. So some diseases are more transmissible than others. So obviously, the more transmissible it is, the easier it is to pass on to somebody else, the higher the herd immunity threshold will be. How good the vaccine is will have an influence as well. So some vaccines are better than others. Some vaccines last longer than others. So again, that would have an impact. And also, density of population has an impact, because if you're living in an area where you're coming into contact with people regularly, a lot of different people regularly, there's a much greater chance of the disease being passed on in high density populations. If you live in somewhere where you rarely come into contact with anybody new and you're in a bubble, as it were, then the spread of the disease is a lot lower. And so herd immunity can be lower in those areas. You'll be able to link in what I'm saying to, I'm not going to talk too much about coronavirus, but you could be able to link in what I'm saying with what's been going on with COVID-19. So there's a lot of writing on this slide. I've just taken it from the World Health Organization. And it's just to show that the threshold is different for different diseases. So measles, 95% need to be vaccinated. Polio, much lower at 80%. So that tells you something about how transmissible the diseases are. COVID-19, well, we're yet to find that out, really. There's estimates out there, but nobody really knows yet what the threshold will be. So you'll be aware of this. You're living through it, you're living through the biggest mass vaccination program that's ever taken place worldwide. So you'll be aware of some of the issues. You know, it's incredibly expensive. You know, we're a relatively rich, well, a very rich nation in comparison to other nations within the world. And yet we're going to have to pay for this for many years to come, and it's going to cost us. It's hugely expensive to carry out this mass vaccination program. So you can imagine in countries where money is short in supply, that it's not necessarily a priority for governments there. So poverty obviously has an issue, it causes an issue in terms of completing mass vaccination programs and reaching herd immunity. You know, you need a certain percentage of people to have the vaccine in order to reach herd immunity. You also have that trouble in this country as well, though. So, for example, if you need 95% of the population to be immunized in order to control the spread of the disease through the population, well, sometimes you're going to struggle in this country, not because of money, but because you know, some people believe that the vaccines are dangerous, that, you know, they believe some of the negative press around some of the vaccines, and they're concerned about the side effects of the vaccines. And so they don't take the vaccine, they don't have the vaccine. So again, there's in lots of different countries, there are different issues that you need to overcome if you're going to reach herd immunity through these mass vaccination programs. So antigenic variation. You may have heard about different strains of coronavirus. And that's not a surprise. Viruses change regularly. Viruses are constantly mutating. If you think about the cold virus, It's mutating all the time. That's why we can't fix the cold. We don't have a cure for the cold because it's constantly changing. So what actually is happening when these mutations take place, when we get these new strains? What does it mean? Well, basically, their antigens are changing. So remember we said the antigen, the marker, is the thing that triggers the immune response. And the antibodies that are produced are very specific to the antigen. Now, if there's a mutation within the virus, a change to the DNA, then a change to the DNA leads to a change in the proteins. And we've said, haven't we, that the antigen markers are quite often proteins. So if you have a change, as we see down here in 3, if the antigen has changed in some way, then the memory cells that you have lying in wait for the original antigen, well, they're not going to respond to the new version of the antigen or the new strain of the virus. And so you have to go through the primary immune response again, where you build up your memory cells. So you don't have that secondary response. You don't have immunity to the virus. And so your body has to start again, as it were. So how is that overcome? Well, we won't talk about coronavirus. We don't know what's going to happen with coronavirus. You know, potentially, we may have to have regular vaccines for COVID-19 if it continues to mutate regularly. But that's not unusual. So susceptible people will each year get a flu jab or jag, depending on which country you come from. So each year, because the flu virus mutates and changes, the vaccine has to change. And the new antigens need to be injected into people so that they can, so that their immune system can respond to the new antigens, develop the memory cells for the new antigens. And so if they are infected with the flu virus, they have the memory cells, the specific memory cells lying in wait, ready to attack it. Okay, so have a look through the key points, and if you have any questions for that, write them down and get in touch with your teacher. So we're going to keep going. This next bit is very, very short. It links in with immunization and vaccines, and it's really just learning a few key definitions. So pause the video, have a look at the key terms that you need to learn. Okay, so again, you'll have heard about clinical trials taking place with relation to COVID-19. And you can't just go and carry out a mass vaccination program without having a look at the side effects of the vaccine and checking that the vaccine actually works. So that's what a clinical trial is, to see how safe the vaccine is, or to see how safe the drug is, and to see how effective it is at getting rid of the disease or at triggering an immune response. Some key terms that you need to know. So generally speaking, during a clinical trial, you will have 2 groups. So group A and group B. Group A will be given the vaccine or the drug, and the other group will be given a placebo. So basically, they'll be given an injection, but it won't contain the antigen, or it won't contain the drug. And that's basically so that you can make a comparison between the 2 groups. You can then see the effect of the vaccine or the effect of the drug, and you can compare the effect between one group that has had the vaccine and another group that hasn't had the vaccine or hasn't had the drug. Linked in with that, the trials are said to be double blind. So you've got your two groups, Group A and Group B. Group A getting the drug. Group A getting the drug, Group B getting the placebo. But the scientists, the researchers, and the people involved in the trial do not know which group they are in. And that's to prevent bias. Okay, so the people, if you get in the injection, as far as you know, you're getting the drug. Yeah, everybody thinks that they're getting the vaccine. Nobody really knows whether they're getting the vaccine or whether they're getting the placebo. And even the researchers don't know which of the candidates are getting the drug and which are getting the placebo. The third thing is that the groups, Group A and Group B, are randomized. So you can't just have, young males in one group that are, of a good weight. And then in the next group, Group B, you've got old, female, overweight. That doesn't make the trial fair. So the groups are randomized, usually using a computer. So that shows how there's your population that you're going to use to carry out the trial. And the computer will randomly split them into two groups. The first group being the test group that receives the drug or the vaccine. The second group receiving the placebo. And you can see that there's a fair mixture of gender, age, past health history, different health, and whether they're, the BMI, basically, whether they're overweight as well, because that can have an impact upon the results. So make sure you know about these key terms. Placebo, be able to define it, be able to define a double-blind trial and why we have double-blind trials, and be able to explain what randomized means and why the groups are randomized. The final thing is to do with the size of the trial. So we've talked about this a lot in science over the years. Repetition makes something more reliable. So for a trial, really to have results that show significant differences, your two groups that you have, Group A and Group B, need to be big enough so that you can see a statistical significance between the two groups, the one receiving the drug or the vaccine and the one receiving the placebo. So that's the final thing to keep in mind. Have a look at the key terms and the key learning points. Think what your questions are and get in touch with your teacher if you need any help.